Hello, I'm Ted Asregadoo. This is Truthout Interviews, where I get to have a one-on-one discussion with some of the writers who contribute to the news and opinion site, truthout.org. On the program is Michael Meurer. He's the president of Meurer Groups and Associates. It's a California, Colorado political consulting firm. Michael's also served as the senior advisor to the California Democratic Party and has co-founded the Courage Campaign, which is a progressive grassroots political organization where he served as deputy chair. He also penned a piece on Truthout called Cantaloupe versus al-Qaeda, What's More Dangerous? Hi, Michael. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for setting up this interview.
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the end of your article because you do raise some interesting questions about the role of Cesar Chavez in political action. So right at the end of the article, you propose a more direct action campaign that's launched to push back against those lobbyists, those congressmen and women in the House and in the Senate that are pushing for food deregulation, meaning that they're trying to deregulate the industry so there's less inspections. But you invoke a kind of a sketch, or you bring up a kind of a sketch of a possible campaign by invoking the work of Cesar Chavez. During the 60s and 70s, Cesar Chavez and people who were involved in the movement were going to supermarkets and handing out leaflets, basically pieces of paper, explaining why they need to support the labor efforts of the UFW, and I look at that and I think, well, it was effective back then, and you do talk about that, but we're talking through Skype. We were talking prior to the recording of this interview about our smartphones and how amazing it is to take such great pictures and things like that. Would it be more effective to have a campaign that is more digitally based, meaning that it uses the internet, than something that it seems a little bit, old school, to go back to the 60s and 70s and having people stand outside of a supermarket and do a one-on-one with people and try to campaign that way?
I didn't really mean that to be like a literal recommendation for a modern campaign. What I was trying to evoke was the spirit of Cesar Chavez. And that spirit is one-on-one contact. Nothing else works. And best done by volunteers, not paid professionals. And I still think that's the key. As you aptly point out, we have all kinds of new tools with Skype, with social media. These are good uses for social media where we can actually reach out to people, even through voter databases now. So it's a little intrusive, but there are many, many ways to reach people. So I don't know what the parameters of that campaign would look like, but I wanted to invoke the mindset, the spirit, so to speak, of Cesar Chavez and his belief that we have to fight against becoming dispirited, becoming confused, and then becoming inactive as a result. We can't let that happen. People are very concerned about food safety, which is why I use sort of a little bit of a lurid title. I wanted there almost to be an element of the absurd in the title of the article, because I thought that the comparison I was making seems absurd on its face, because the level of spending on homeland security and terrorism, anti-terrorism activities, and military expenditures is certifiably crazy at this point. In the current instance, where we're fighting to save the Food Safety and Modernization Act, which is still, it's not the ultimate answer. You can't inspect safety into food. We need to somehow, over time, break up this global agribusiness system that we've set up so that we have our produce and our meat and so forth and dairy grown and produced closer to home. But the Food Safety Modernization Act was passed to move the FDA from a sort of passive inspection mode into a more aggressive prevention mode.
I do want to get to that, but one of the things I wanted to go back to was the title of your article, which is Cantaloupe versus al-Qaeda, What's More Dangerous? Now, you did say it's a bit of absurdist, but it has sort of a humorous overtone, but you're being absolutely serious about it. You're looking at the numbers of how many people have died within the number of deaths due to terrorism for Americans versus food contamination. And you weigh the two numbers and you find that food contamination has killed more people than terrorism has. Killed more Americans, that is.
Yeah, every year, frankly. I mean, there are about 3,000 Americans killed every year from foodborne pathogens. And those figures are may or may not be accurate. During the Bush administration, they reconfigured the way these numbers are calculated. The number used to be somewhere between 5,700 and 7,500 deaths every year. And then magically, through the modernization of the FDA, it dropped down to 3,000 per year. Either way, it's a tragedy, and it's largely preventable, I believe.
And what is causing the contamination? You were saying that these are pathogens. Are they coming from animals, or is it chemicals? What are we looking at?
Yeah, for the most part, it's there are two causes. Plants, of course, don't carry these pathogens, or they don't develop them on their own. They come from animals and humans, and that would be in the form of pesticides or E. coli, listeria, and so forth, salmonella. These are animal-borne pathogens, and we get this contamination through contaminated equipment where they're processing other things, perhaps meat, perhaps processed foods that use animal byproducts, or from the proximity of fields where lettuce and tomatoes and so forth are grown to industrial feedlots. And in the Central Valley of California, where the United States gets 1/6 of its agricultural produce, you see that all the time, the proximity of big, gigantic industrial feedlots with their manure lagoons and so forth, contaminating groundwater close to fields where crops are grown. So it's a huge issue.
In the world of regulating food within inspection and the production of food, there are regulations and laws on the books that are trying to be repealed and rolled back. So to decrease the number of foodborne pathogens, the number of contaminated food, the FDA, I would imagine, has a number of guidelines for farmers, for food producers, for people that are in that industry to follow and to regulate that. So what is being deregulated that is causing, if you could name like a couple, that is causing the increase in foodborne pathogens and contamination?
Well, I don't know that it's increasing. I think it's been pretty steady over the last 20 years, frankly, except for that inflection point where they reconfigured the way they calculate the numbers. So it's pretty steady every year. Therefore, it's probably should be, I would guess, fairly easy to identify. I don't want to pass myself off as an expert in food safety regulations or how the FDA operates and so forth. My intention in using the foodborne pathogen model to compare to terrorism was the relative risk versus the relative expenditures. And you have a complete lunatic disproportion in spending on terrorism because the level of fear is completely irrational versus the facts. As you saw in the article, we've had fewer than 500, leaving out 9/11, we've had fewer than 500 deaths from terrorism of Americans in the last 40 years. You're 110 times more likely to die in any given year from foodborne poisoning, from food poisoning from foodborne pathogens. So that was what I wanted to get at. We're spending about $1 billion a year on food inspection, and we're spending, over 1.2 or 1.3 trillion a year on national security, 75 billion alone just on the NSA and 15 other intelligence agencies, basically to spy on ourselves, it looks like. And yet, this has done almost no good in one sense. You had two deranged murderers who were able to carry off the Boston Marathon bombing. In spite of this enormous expenditure year after year after year, we weren't even able to intercept them, even with direct warnings from Soviet intelligence agencies. So I wanted to get at that irrationality. Food safety lent itself to the comparison because the way it strikes is just as random and just as irrational as terrorism. And they both kind of strike a similar kind of fear. That's why I use the comparison. Well, if we've got this one scary, random kind of violence happening to people, and we're spending $1 billion a year, and yet we've got this other thing that has a similar kind of modus operandi, or psychological effect is a better way to say that. Why are we spending 1.2 or 1.3 trillion a year on that? It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Food cuts across all class, gender, all lines, really, because we all need to eat to stay alive. And here in this country, we have food inspections, and we have a federal agency that's tasked with making sure that the food that we consume is safe. But yet there is a movement afoot in Congress to deregulate the inspection of food. It's essentially trying to gut this, and you talked about this earlier, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And so maybe you could talk about what is in the act that Republicans and maybe some Democrats find so, whether they disagree with it on the face of it, or they're just getting pressure from their lobby groups to undo it. What is it about this act that is creating such a counter movement, as it were?
There are two factors there. I suppose one is just purely ideological. The act was passed by both houses of Congress. It was signed into law by President Obama, and then it's just been hung up with amendment after amendment in the Senate and the House. One of the amendments was to provide an exemption for small farmers. And at that point, large agribusiness lobbyists were actually in favor of the act because they can comply, they can afford to do this. And everybody was included under the act. Well, once this exemption for, quote, small farmers was put in place, they withdrew their support and started lobbying to have this act amended or just gutted. And they defined small farmers as any farm operation with $500,000 a year or smaller. Well, that to me is an awfully big operation. That's $500,000 a year. That seems like a pretty big farm to me. And the agribusiness lobby group just withdrew their support because I guess they felt that they were some of those people under 500,000 would have an unfair competitive advantage. That amendment came from who's the senator from Montana?
Was it Max Backus or John Tester?
It was Tester.
Tester, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it. Thank you, the internet, for that one.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I looked it up.
Thank you. A modern miracle. The guy who's really thrown a wrench in the works here is Benechek in the House. He's on the House Agricultural Committee, and he has a lot of corporate and gets a lot of money from them, corporate fruit growers and produce growers in his district in northern Michigan. And so when it came before the committee, he said that we needed to go back and rethink the act and do a lot more research and so forth on how these regulations would impact agribusiness concerns, because evidently his fruit farmers are telling him this is going to cost us a lot of money to comply. We have to make sure that our water's clean and safe before we can even wash the fruits or irrigate them. We have to go through this cleanup regime with our tools and our processing equipment and so forth. It's going to add cost, basically. This Benecek guy, is opposed also in a philosophic sense to a regulation, period. The market is a sacred construct in their thinking. And the Tea Party people have this belief in the market as an untouchable, inviolable concept, and you can't even regulate it. I mean, if you think about it, even Obamacare is nothing but regulating insurance cartels. It isn't some socialist thing at all, but they're philosophically opposed to regulation. So you start from that basis, and then you have his constituents, these agribusiness companies, telling him it's going to add cost to their production and harvesting of fruit. And so he's proposed all these further studies and surveys and research and so forth. Never mind that the FDA already went through that before this thing came before Congress. They've vetted all of the regulations, done cost-benefit analysis on all of them. That information has already been is available, and those studies have already been done. It's just a stalling tactic, basically. And so you've got the two groups that I mentioned in my article.
The Center for Food Safety and the Center for Environmental Health?
Yes, both of them joined together with some smaller groups and filed a lawsuit to force the implementation of the Food Safety and Modernization Act. And they won the lawsuit. Went to a district court. And so they have until 2015, the government does, to actually begin complying, spending the money, and implementing the new regime. But there's all kinds of other issues here. We're going to have to keep political pressure on, which is why I was suggesting some sort of direct action campaign. which is probably best done through these two organizations.
You work as a political consultant, and you were certainly involved in grassroots political movements. I mean, I've never been at that level. You know, I've certainly signed petitions or shown up to show voice my support, written letters to my congresswoman or congressman, and tried to do it as a sort of just as an individual. But you work in the way you work on the other end and try to motivate people on a larger scale. What do you think from your expertise in that is an effective way to get people to pay more attention to this than, as you say, in the article, that it's easy to scare people with terrorism because of 9/11. It just invokes that image, that memory of that horrific day. And so when people talk about needing more money for Homeland Security or needing more money to protect people and their safety against the big bad of terrorism, it resonates. But food safety, it doesn't, I mean, I guess at some level, it doesn't sound very sexy. Oh, wow, my food's safe. But then you think about it in terms of, wait a minute, I'm eating this and this could cause not only sickness, but possible death if it's not inspected properly. So how best to create a campaign for people to be aware, and also to be aware at such a level that they're going to push back and have as much influence, if not more influence, than the lobby firms that are very entrenched within Washington, D.C. and state capitals around the nation?
Well, that's a great question, and the odds are formidable. I mean, the enormous amounts of money. You saw in the article, I did the research in Open Secrets on the amount of money that agribusiness is spending on lobbying, and they're there in D.C. all the time. So any grassroots effort would have to get some funding from somewhere, and I haven't really thought through exactly what a campaign such as that would look like, and the only way you could actually is to get out in the field, start talking to people. How would this actually work? What would motivate you to do this? I think that the motivation is probably there. You also fight this other problem of there's so many things that we need to be cognizant of and working and fighting against. How do you prioritize what thing you're going to tackle? This is a winnable battle, though, because the Food Safety Modernization Act is just a first step. It's not an end game at all. But you win that battle and then you move on to the next battle. And I think if you could get people focused on, look, this is pretty easy to win. We can get this thing implemented and have it start working. So we ramp up the number of inspections. And it's not just inspection oriented. It's actually getting out in the field and working with people who are producing food, companies and people, to get ahead of the curve. So we're not constantly fighting these recalls after people have become sickened or after the contamination has been discovered. And you do that by literally talking to people one-on-one, and using social media and all the modern tools that we have to amplify that message. And I again, Ted, I just don't have a cookie cutter answer for that. It's really hard to organize people and get them motivated, and usually it happens, unfortunately, around the issue du jour. It's something that's just a burning issue at the moment. Long-term organizing is a little different kind of thing, and it takes resources, it takes feet on the ground, and then it takes a really smart social media campaign. And I don't mean just throwing up a website. I mean literally building a digital ecosystem centered on an issue that makes people feel empowered and motivates them to take action.
I think that the Republicans, people on the right, conservatives, they have a fairly effective ecosystem. I mean, they have not only a 24-hour cable network news channel, they have a lot of AM talk radio is very much on the right. Certainly reinforced with an online digital presence through blogs, although I don't know how effective that is. I think that the mass media of television and radio, they're every single day and having essentially spokesmen talking up their issue of the day. And those people that listen to talk radio and have their favorites, whether it's Rush Limbaugh or whoever, will pick up the phone and will call their representative. And so, in a sense, the Republicans have got they have the money behind them to do this. That's one of the things. And money is a very key issue. But they have, I worked in the media for a long time and worked on the advertising side too. But they used to say, well, if you wanted an effective marketing campaign, you need two elements, time and frequency. So the longer duration that you're on, the more frequent you're on, the more you're going to get results. And it seems like on the progressive side or on the left side of the political spectrum, the money's just not there because, quite frankly, the groups that are on the progressive radar in terms of causes, a lot of the people that are in those populations, they don't have a lot of money. So you can't go to them and say, gee, can you write a $10,000 check? Because the answer would be no. I could probably write you a $10 check if that, So to have that kind of ecosystem, it takes a lot of money to build up, and it's not easy to do. You're right.
It takes money and time, and you're absolutely right. Every successful campaign starts, number one, with a clear message. And we, on the left, we tend to have, message profusion. We have 20 messages, not one message. And, you've got to pick an issue and stick with it. And you've just got to beat it to death. In any campaign, the sort of rule of thumb is it takes 6 to 8 media impressions before you even begin to reach cognition on a subliminal level. And then you have to keep going with that very same message. So it's endless repetition and consistency, unfortunately. And if you're able to do that over time, you will break through. You will get people motivated because it begins to bubble up further towards the surface of their consciousness. And I think it's a matter of focus and using the resources we do have more wisely.
I admire the work that you do. You certainly have done a wonderful job of highlighting food safety in a way that breaks down the numbers in a very comprehensive way. I urge all Truthout readers to read this article, and if you're not reading Truthout, definitely check it out. It's right there for you on truthout.org. And Michael, I really want to thank you for being on the program.
Well, thanks very much, Ted. I really appreciate your making time, and thanks Truthout publishing this kind of thing day in and day out.
And that's Truthout Interviews for another week. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.